As you say, a very warm welcome to everybody who's able to join us for promoting diversity in housing for a diverse older population. This is the 9th and final happy hour session of our spring summer series, and gosh, hasn't the time flown by. We've had a really exciting programme, and this session is going to be no exception as we look at a broad range of issues impacting on diverse communities and as they age, in particular in England. We're joined by 4 great speakers, and we're going to kick off shortly with Dr. Caroline Holland, who's an honorary associate at the Open University, but also a key partner with the Bangla Housing Association and the Housing LIN on the Amar Bari, Amar Jibon project, looking at Bangladeshi probin community in East London. And Caroline, we had a fantastic consultative event last week with the GLA and the Deputy Mayor, which I'm sure you will draw attention to. We are also honoured to be joined by Henri Baptiste. He's actually in Dominica in the Caribbean at the moment. And good morning to you, Henri. You're the founder of Pathway Housing Solutions and long track record of working closely with diverse communities here in England. And we really look forward to hearing your contribution on the research and evaluation that you undertake. And Mushtaq's been a long-term friend of the Housing LIN, now the Chief Exec of the Housing Diversity Network. I think, Mushtaq, you and I go back, quite a few years, maybe decades even. But I think this is the first time for a long time that you're speaking at a happy hour, and you're going to look at issues around older ageing from BME communities. So really delighted that you can sort of draw attention to some of the experiences and lessons from your broad membership. And Laura, welcome as well. Laura Benbow, if you haven't caught it, she recently wrote a guest blog for us, which we published last week. And you're going to take a slightly different look at issues around equalities and inclusion from a Coastline perspective. Coastline are a member of the Southwest Housing LIN leadership set with Louise Beard. And we're delighted, Laura, that you could join us and put Coastline under the spotlight. So we're going to have a sort of a great tour of issues affecting the diversity of our older population. But before I sort of hand over to Caroline, if you haven't come across it, Shelter published a very useful report last week looking at racism and discrimination in accessing social housing. And with that in mind, I think we really need to think about how we tackle the types of housing emergency that many people from different mixed and black communities experience in the UK. But without further ado, I'm going to ask Caroline to introduce the Amar Bari, Amar Jibon project and present on that. So welcome everybody, and Caroline, please do kick us off.
Okay, good afternoon and thank you, Jeremy. Yes, I'm going to talk about the Amar Bari project, which has been highly collaborative, starting with the initial partnership with Housing LIN, the Open University and Bangla Housing Association, and funded by the Vivensa Foundation, which is formerly known as the Dunhill Medical Trust. Next slide, please, Sally. So, the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the vulnerability of many older Bangladeshis, with excess deaths and hospitalisations, often related to housing and health conditions, which aided the virus. Now, Bangla Housing had picked up on this, and together we all wanted to explore with older Bangladeshis, that's probins in Bangla, their experiences of home, housing and neighbourhood. Excuse me. Sorry, and apologies. And to understand what it was that they would aspire to if opportunities were given to them. So in order to do this, we needed to be able to talk directly with them and their families and include the community as far as we possibly could in doing the research itself. So we adopted a co-production approach from the outset, with evolving kinds of engagement as the research progressed. Next slide, please, Sally. For example, we discovered that in addition to the original project development team from the three organisations, we had a dedicated research fellow, Dr. Myra Ruby, herself from the community, and an advisory group from the community that included probins, a professional advisory group, and bilingual co-researchers who we trained to carry out the research. The way the project grew as it needed to, for example, we discovered we needed to recruit people from the community to help us to translate and transcribe the interviews. They brought an understanding of cultural references, and we trained them in aspects of confidentiality, data handling, and understanding technical terms. Next slide, please, Sally. Next slide. So this is where we worked, in 4 adjacent boroughs in East London, Tower Hamlets, Newham, Hackney and Redbridge, where some Bangladeshi families had migrated from the more inner boroughs. We looked for men and women aged over 50 across all tenures, which resulted in 76 in-depth interviews with probins, followed by 8 family group interviews. Next slide. Briefly, there was about an even split of female and male participants, the majority living in Tower Hamlets and Newham, where there are proportionally larger Bangladeshi communities. Half were in social housing, that's housing association and council, with a small number in sheltered housing, and around a third in owner-occupied housing, though not necessarily being the owner themselves. More than half the province had no formal education qualifications, with only 9% having studied beyond A-level. The education of their children had often been strong motivation in their life decisions. Next slide, please, Sally. Most of our participants were in the 59 to 64 and 65 to 74 age groups, predominantly social renters with a mix of employment and benefits. Most of the probins are or have been employed in routine and semi-routine jobs. However, we did interview probins across a range of circumstances, including a few living comfortably with occupational as well as state pensions and courses. Please. Could we skip that now? I'll come back to that one. So we wanted to explore how suitable their current accommodation was for these probins. A small number were living alone or in couples. Most were living with other family members, mainly their children and or grandchildren, while some of the younger probin also had parents living with them. Where 3 or more generations were living together, we call this multi-generational, the type of household we've researched separately in group interviews. While around 20 families were living in statutorily overcrowded households, we found that many more were experiencing the stresses and inconveniences of overcrowding, and for similar reasons. So we've called this functional overcrowding, not formally recognised, but keenly felt and affecting how people could use the spaces in their homes. We found that homes were needed for uses that were often more than the spaces allowed or were designed for. For example, people tend to have more belongings than in the past and use spaces differently, such as doing laundry at home rather than communally, working from home, doing exercise, etc. People at different life stages also have different and sometimes conflicting needs for the same space. Probins in particular were affected by multiple use spaces that were used for sleeping. Often they were sleeping in living rooms themselves. We saw how the shape of domestic spaces can have an impact on cultural, faith and relational practices. And we saw also that suitable accommodation for these probins meant including family. Next, please. There were extensive reporting of problems with maintenance and repairs, sometimes long-standing, including problems with damp, mould, poor or no insulation, problems with windows, electricals and plumbing. Probins in rented accommodation were the most affected. Repairs often took a long time to get resolved or went uncompleted, leading to lack of trust in the systems and in communications with landlords. This wasn't just a language problem, though some probins did need help in getting across complicated messages, even though they spoke English. But automated and online reporting systems were big barriers to them, leading to feeling unseen and just living with the housing conditions that could have been sorted out. Properties where there was no provision of external spaces, including balconies in flats and gardens for growing food, presented problems too, for multiple practical and psychological reasons, particularly for probins who have to spend most of their time living at home. Next, please. Probins in the oldest age groups had at least 2 chronic health conditions, but among younger groups, very few reported no ongoing health problems at all, with most experiencing multiple conditions. The most prevalent being cardiovascular and related, diabetes and musculoskeletal conditions. There were several mentions of mental ill health, with a small number of the oldest reporting memory or mild problems. Mobility within the home was a problem for many, in addition to external stairs in flats and maisonettes. We saw tenure-specific differences in the possibilities, but a general unmet need for adaptations to meet increasing age and health-related conditions. We found that specific religious and cultural practices, essential to the mental well-being of the probins, also created additional demands, for example, in relation to separate kitchens from living rooms and separate bathrooms and WCs. For Bangladeshi Muslim elders, water-related practices are a good example of this. Next, please. In addition to hygiene requirements related to health conditions such as diabetic incontinence and mobility issues in actually getting into and out and using the toilet and bathrooms, cultural and faith-related water practices added to the challenges for probins. The use of wash kettles, including for ablutions before prayer, presented problems for them in lifting and carrying the heavy wash kettle from high or awkwardly placed sinks. The requirement to undertake ritual cleansing 5 times a day added to the frequency with which they needed to access the toilet at age and health. In multi-generational households, the requirements of other family members added to demands on the facilities, leading to conflicts about access to bathrooms, especially during peak times. Cramped and poorly designed facilities added to the problem. Combined bathrooms and WCs could be especially stressful. Finally, it must be said, next slide, please. Finally, it must be said that in spite of the complications and stresses of living in family, very few of the probins seriously contemplated living any other way. Some had not heard about sheltered housing. Some knew about it, but regarded it as a lonely way to live. Many said that their children would not allow them to live alone. There was some shifting of positions based on the unlikelihood of achieving suitable living accommodation for all the family, and some probins had in fact moved into sheltered already. But for most of the probins, ageing with family remains their desired goal. Next slide, please. I'll finish here. This has been a taste of the emerging findings. You can read more and watch a co-researcher produced animation about 4 probins' housing journeys on the Housing LIN website. We are still consulting extensively, as Jeremy said, on the findings and on potential recommendations. So please do get in touch with us if you have anything to say or any questions. And thank you for listening.
Well, Caroline, and thank you for presenting. And I do encourage everybody to have a look at that microsite on the Housing LIN website. It does have a lot of detail about the project. We're very much hoping that the final report will be published later this year, but the animation that Caroline just referred to is a really powerful piece, articulating really capturing the stories of 4 hypothetical Bangla probin communities, and the way they've been put together in that animation is, as I said, very powerful. Do have a watch. So thanks very much for that and kicking off our happy hour this afternoon. But we're going to go right across the world now and join Henri. Henri, thanks ever so for making the time this morning, and your work here in the UK around diversity in housing. So I'm going to hand over to you and the work of the Pathway Housing Solutions.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. I'm just going to start by providing some context and background to our research, including what community-led housing is about. So it's fair to say that many of the housing challenges we face today stem from regional and social inequalities. We know that one solution cannot fix all, and we need a strategic, long-term, place-based approach to tackle these issues. This approach should ensure that our housing solutions are not just reactive, but proactive, addressing both current and future societal needs, and ensuring that quality housing is accessible, affordable, and adaptable for all segments of society. Within this context, then, there is a growing demand for community-focused developments and housing, and for innovative housing models that can adapt to changing life patterns, support multi-generational living and co-housing, and foster community cohesion. Next slide, please. Within the context of access to housing, it's important to recognize that inequalities exist, and that various research studies, including Henry Smith, Crisis, Joseph Roundtree, and Reherit Watt, continue to evidence that BME people are disproportionately affected by the housing crisis. Shelter's most recent report that Jeremy made reference to is Start Reading, and it talks about the Black and mixed heritage people continuing to face systemic discrimination when trying to secure a social home. This is rooted in historic and structural racism within the housing system. Next slide, please. The housing challenges faced by Black elders, we know that aging presents unique economic vulnerabilities, and that by 2050, a quarter of the UK population will be over 60 years old. And we also know that these inequalities are intensified for Black elders, with Black Caribbean people aged 50 and over significantly less likely to own their own homes outright. Many rely on fixed incomes from Social Security or limited pensions, making it difficult to absorb rising costs, property taxes, or unexpected repairs. And those without the buffer of home ownership are especially at risk, facing increased rents and the threat of home ownership. I think another point to mention here is the final report of the Older People's Housing Task Force, Our Future Homes. Some of the key points that jumped out from that report for me were the importance of home and community, no one size fits all. And the report also defined community-led homes, recommending that these terms are adopted for wider use in policy and practice. And you can see from the slide that's in front of you currently, give some background to what community-led development is. It talks about the various different models, the approach taken in terms of a grassroots approach, a bottom-up approach. It talks about partnership, as well as the legal models that are important in terms of developing housing. Slide 4, please. So the drivers for our research were based on community-led housing and the ecosystem, the housing ecosystem that operates around that. Some of the key drivers were the fact that Homes England had established the self-commissioned unit, the revised National Planning Policy Framework, the devolved white paper for local authorities, and the new Procurement Act, as well as a campaign that Pathway Housing Solutions are launching called the Local Homes Campaign. But it's important to understand that within this context, the housing associations are disposing their street properties to the market, that small sites are being overlooked in favour of bigger sites, and large developments aren't necessarily considering community-led housing. Furthermore, the Chartered Institute of Housing and the National Housing Federation's housing strategy don't necessarily incorporate policy that supports the growth of community-led housing. So, moving on to slide 5 and our research report. Research itself provides a roadmap for collaborative partnership between housing associations, local authorities, other key stakeholders, and community-led housing organisation. It champions community-led housing and its potential to complement other measures to address the housing crisis and create additional affordable housing, and provides a series of recommendations for housing associations, infrastructure bodies, local and combined authorities, central government, and funders, identifying significant opportunities to grow community-led housing. Next slide, please. So the rationale for our research. The research was actually initiated by myself and Claude Henriksen. And Claude works as a professional and leads community homes as a technical advisor, providing support to community groups who are looking to establish community-led housing. So the report was a combination of academic services and experiences provided by Liverpool University in the form of Tom Moore and Sheffield Hallam University. So it was a co-produced process, and the research benefited from the proactive support and engagement of leading professionals across the community-led housing and wider housing ecosystem. We were commissioned by a consortium of 12 community-led housing organisations and funding bodies to explore barriers to participation in community-led housing among Black and minority ethnic communities. The report really reflected, or the background to the report reflected, growing interest in community-led housing sector and as to ways in which diversity and inclusion could be improved as part of that process. It looked at barriers related to underrepresentation and limited diversity in new community-led housing projects, the disproportionate resource allocation, exclusion from social networks that disseminate opportunities for community-led housing, and it also looked at interest in the potential of community-led housing to tackle stark racial inequalities that exist in the English housing system. However, there have been very few studies that have looked at issues of race and ethnicity in community-led housing. So in many ways, we're starting really from a blank sheet of paper. The aims and objectives. Next slide, please. 2-year project partnership, as I said, between academics and practitioners, funded by a range of organisations, and the ultimate aims highlighted there: raise awareness of the barriers encountered by BME communities when accessing community-led housing, and to understand the benefits of community-led housing to BME communities and relevant stakeholders. Can we move on to the next slide, please? The key findings. The benefits of community-led housing and the importance of partnerships, I think, are crucial in the information that we gathered and the conversations that we had. Black and minority ethnic community-led housing project participants who conducted in this research felt that developing community-led housing enhanced their ability to grow and influence and own planning and development processes in their own area. In addition, it provided more secure and affordable housing for communities that have been underserved by other forms of housing provision. Research participants from communities and professional organisations also recognise that awareness of community-led housing amongst Black and minority ethnic communities is low, and this included limited awareness of the benefits of community-led housing amongst public sector, civic and advocacy organisations. Next slide, please. Access to resources is key to the success of community-led housing projects. The success of Black and minority ethnic community-led projects is threatened by inconsistent funding frameworks and policy processes that are unsupportive of community agency. So moving on to slide 10, our recommendations. There were a series of recommendations that we came out with for infrastructure bodies, as I said, local government, national government, housing association, funding agencies. On this page, or for this presentation, I think if we look at the focus in terms of housing associations, I think is more pertinent for this particular presentation. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So housing associations, one of the recommendations clear is that the delivery models should be developed and adapted to the benefit of BME communities, developing community-led housing, e.g. small sites, and looking at alternative approaches to asset disposal. I'll provide an example there of a partnership arrangement was established with Housing 21, and there is a link in this slide, and I think the slides will be shared to you after this event as well. So key messages there for housing associations, and there are also key messages for councils and devolved government. It was felt that there's a real opportunity now to promote opportunities for land disposal and acquisition, so explore the use of self-build registers and the targeting of community-led housing land disposal policies, and also in other planning policies. It was also felt that developing inclusive planning and engagement processes within existing frameworks was really crucial, and that combined authorities consider how the needs of BME communities are reflected in their approach and commitment to community-led housing. So in summary then, in terms of our recommendations, partnerships with housing associations, enabler hubs and local authorities can help projects succeed. Housing bodies should look at creating strategies to increase Black and minority ethnic participation and support networks. Funders should look at providing targeted funding and monitoring diversity in terms of allocations of resources. Government should encourage partnerships and evaluate funding for Black and minority ethnic groups. Local authorities should look at opportunities to offer land and ensure inclusive planning processes. So in conclusion, the new paradigm for housing, next slide please. The new paradigm for housing requires us to think beyond bricks and mortar. It is centered in the NPPF, in the Evolution White Paper, in neighborhood renewal plan, in government targets for meeting housing need. It calls for a more collaborative, interdisciplinary approach that brings together expertise from all stakeholders, including community development. Community-led housing offers a radical alternative to traditional top-down housing models by centering the lived experiences and voices of Black and Asian elders. Such models not only address immediate housing needs, but adapt to the changing needs of our society and also challenge systemic inequalities. As the population ages and becomes more diverse, investing in and supporting community-led housing for Black and Asian elders is not just an act of social justice, but a blueprint for inclusive and sustainable communities. Community-led housing has emerged as a transformative approach. For Black and Asian elders who often face unique challenges in traditional housing models, community-led housing solutions offers a range of significant benefits, including affordable housing, cultural belonging, improved health outcomes, and stronger community ties, ultimately enhancing the quality of life for Black and Asian elders. I'd just like to thank you for inviting me to this presentation, Jeremy. If anybody wants any further information regarding our research and work we're doing around housing, community-led housing, please get in touch. Thanks again for listening.
Henri, great presentation, and I think you captured both the sort of the rights-based approach, demonstrating not just the inequalities, but the inequity in our institutional systems, but also the encouragement to have community-led approaches can really empower and engage with grassroots and start filtering up to create solutions which are inclusive for Black and Asian communities and for the older populations in those. So thanks for very thought-provoking presentation. Great to have had that, and also probably sets the scene really well for Mushtaq about how his members are responding to those very challenges and also identifying solutions. And I'm sure Laura will also have things, because I know Coastline have just gone through your inspection as well, and things around equalities and things like that I'm sure would have been coming through even in a sort of semi-rural area down deep in the southwest. But first of all, let's go to Mushtaq. So a warm welcome to you, Mushtaq. You're not in Dominica.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I'm not in Dominica. I'm actually at the in-laws in Halifax, so it's a long way and it's a very different environment. So if my screen is sharing, and if I just go slideshow. So I'm going to talk about the needs of an aging BA population. I have to say at the start that older communities is not at the heart of what we do at Housing Diversity Network. In many ways, it's peripheral to what we do as an organisation, but I think there are some touch points that I want to talk about. So for those of you who don't know, Housing Diversity Network is a not-for-profit. We work across the housing sector, and broadly our aim is to help organisations be more inclusive. And inclusivity takes a number of forms. It's the way organisations are led, it's the way they develop their workforce, it's the way they provide services to tenants and residents. And we have a number of different programmes. We have an accreditation scheme. We do a lot of training and consultancy. We have webinars, number of conferences a year. We're a member organisation and I've got about 180 members across the sector. So some of the things that I'm going to say initially actually build upon what Henri and Caroline have said. And the first thing I want to talk about is the ageing Black and minority ethnic population in the UK. Population is ageing, and as an example, the Muslim Council of Britain have recently published some research, and there's going to be a vast increase in the number of Muslim people aged 65 plus, plus the number of Muslim women, for example, who report bad or very bad health are quite a high number too. And I think that has some implications for care support and housing needs. So I think we've got what I would say a ticking time bomb in the term of an older Black and minority ethnic community. And I think, and having worked for a Black and minority ethnic housing association providing culturally sensitive services, we still lack culturally appropriate housing options. We lack faith-sensitive and communal housing models. And I think older people from the minority communities still feel excluded from mainstream provision. I mean, I've worked in some of the major cities of the UK. One example I've got is centre of the city is almost exclusively people from an Asian heritage. It's got a number of sheltered housing schemes in there, and they're all exclusively white. So, and that's just not an isolated example. I think the type of housing we're providing doesn't meet the communities that surround it. And as Caroline mentioned, there are inequalities in terms of the housing quality. Older BME adults are more likely to live in poor housing. There's going to be links to poor health outcomes, and there's underinvestment in repairs in marginalised communities. I mean, if those of you who remember, the Better Social Housing Review was published 2 or 3 years ago, and that was as a result of a number of poor incidents in housing, and it was in response to that, came up with a list of examples, going back, having a better repair service, going back to basics, knowing our communities, knowing who's behind the front door, etc. But one of the stark things that came out of the action plan there was that the report said there are 9 protected characteristics, but the overwhelming one, which governs the quality of your house, the quality of the service you get, and the quality of neighbourhood that you live in, is race and ethnicity. And that is, it's a stark reminder of where we are in terms of housing inequalities. So I just want to mention that this is interesting, I think, for housing associations, councils, commissioners, combined authorities. It'd be interesting for me just to find out where we're up to in the housing sector and what everybody's thinking about in terms of equality and diversity. So we did a bit of research looking at housing associations and their equality and diversity strategies, just to see what was in there. Because I think it just gives us a marker of what organisations are doing. As an aside, I do like equality and diversity strategies. I do like BME housing strategies, or whatever people want to call them, just to try and focus people's minds and focus attention and give us something that we can measure progress against. And the top 10 themes that came out of all the strategies were about promoting equality and diversity, using data, having better recruitment, engaging with our customers, making services more accessible, doing more training, reporting and tackling hate crime and discrimination, all the usual stuff. But to me, what was missing in there is that there is nothing in there about aging communities. There's nothing in there about doing equality impact assessments. There's nothing in there about tackling inequality in its wider sense. In our minds, we thought perhaps half the equality and diversity work was actually written by marketing teams rather than people who are doing operational work. And the marketing teams were just writing those reports to make those organizations look good. And there's nothing about reporting back and targets to meet. So I think there are some issues there in the sector that we need to try and think about. So I think that there are gaps in strategies that people write. So strategies that people look at in terms of age and ethnicity, they look at them in silos, they don't look at them together. So people aren't really thinking about the aging population and their development needs. We also like organizations doing equality impact assessments on big policy decisions. So how many housing organizations do an equality impact assessment on their development strategy? I was speaking to an organization the other day that was not doing it on its development strategy, which were they're developing hundreds of homes over the coming years, but we're doing an equality impact assessment on right to buy buybacks, of which they had 10 a year. So it's just like, what you're doing here, you're not looking at the bigger picture. You're looking at very small things. You're doing equality impact assessments rather than doing them on the major things. So I think both equality impact assessments and having a look at your equality strategy are missed opportunities to try and address some of the structural inequalities that have got us to the stage that we are in at the present. So the other thing that I'm really interested in is we do a lot of board work. We do a lot of work with organizations helping to diversify the board, to lead to better decision making, making sure that communities are represented in decision making. And this is just the housing association sector. generally board members are age 55 plus, 2/3 of them are over 55. So you've got an older demographic when it comes to board members, but they're older board members. They're not from minority communities. They are not from the communities that you work in. You can just look at the contrast between board members from minority backgrounds and looking at the population as a whole. So as well as older people, younger and ethnically diverse voices are underrepresented in decision making at the highest level. And I think that limits some of the responsiveness as organizations and as a sector that we can have to an aging BME demographic. So I think there's some systemic barriers. There's a lack of minority leadership in housing associations. We have done a number of baseline studies in different regions. And what we found is at the front line, organizations do reflect the communities that they serve. But as you walk up the stairs, less and less do they reflect the communities that surround them. I think faith and communal norms are not reflected in housing policy, and multi-generational and cultural living needs are ignored. And I think there's just a report that's come out about that recently, which might be something that we need to think about. So final slide from me, what should landlords be thinking about? I also mean councils, commissioners, etc. I think there's a need to understand the areas that you work in, do a bit of demographic mapping, looking at the houses that you are designing to making sure they are culturally sensitive. I really like equality impact assessments, but don't look at things in silos. They will help your decision making. I think there is something to do about representation at the leadership level and in the boardroom to try and improve some of the decision making in this area. And we continually make the point that you need to monitor housing quality by ethnicity and age. I know the regulator has started, housing regulators started to make some moves in that area, but I think we've still got a long way to go. There's nothing to stop you as a housing organisation doing that. So that is my presentation over. Back to you, Jeremy.
Again, another really rich content there, Mushtaq. Thanks very much for presenting and also making the case for both equalities impact assessments, but also giving voice to local communities to be able to have more control over the types of housing and working in partnership. I'm sure we'll come back to quite a few of the things that you've raised as well, but I'm also aware that, you know, we've had 3 presentations very much looking from a research and policy perspective, but also an organisation that's living this, having just gone through its inspection, is Coastline. So Laura, no challenge really for you, but well, actually it is quite a big challenge, I know. But again, I think it's really great that we've got a housing association who also can give their perspective, and also perhaps you might like to comment on a few of the things that you've heard from Caroline, Henri, and Mushtaq as well, which I'm sure sort of been processing in your mind as you've been listening to the presentations as I have. So Laura, welcome, and look forward to hearing from what you've got to say.
Sure, thanks, Jeremy. Okay, so in the world of social housing, the most powerful transformations often begin with a simple act: listening. At Coastline, listening is not a passive activity, it's a dynamic, ongoing conversation. And through the Coastline conversation, we are building a culture where every customer is not only heard, but actively shapes the future of our homes, services, and communities in Cornwall. So this is our Coastline conversation. So this is our involvement offer to customers. And diversity and representativeness are not just values at Coastline, they're embedded in our structure, strategy, and spirit. We understand that our customers come from a wide range of backgrounds, experiences, and needs, which is why we've created multiple pathways for involvement, ensuring that everyone, from the armchair advisor to the active volunteer, has a role to play. So our 3-tiered engagement model that you can see here, so have your say, make a difference, and help us decide, offers flexibility and accessibility, allowing customers to engage in ways that suit their lives to ensure we listen to and value every customer voice. So in 2024 to 2025, over 2,200 customers engaged with us, plus a further 1,100 members of the wider community. These numbers reflect a growing movement of customers shaping Coastline services from the ground up. We've taken deliberate steps to ensure that underrepresented voices are included. Following a review of our engagement diversity, we launched a targeted under 35s engagement plan recognising the need to amplify younger voices in decision making. We also expanded co-production efforts within our homeless service to include those with a lived experience of homelessness.
Sorry, Laura, just to quickly interrupt, do you mind just selecting council on the box that you might be able to see at the top of your screen? It says,
Oh,
I don't know if you can see that on your slides. It's just
are you not getting what I'm with?
no, I
just
can
the presentation.
I can see your presentation. There's just a notification to say that the site is trying to open.
That's
Yeah,
strange.
perfect.
Sorry about that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
No, that's fine. Sorry, I think it was under what I was saying. Thank you. Cool. Is that good, Sally?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So the impact of customer feedback is visible across every corner of Coastline's work. So service improvements, from simplifying complaints processes to enhancing communication around repairs, we've made tangible changes based on what customers have told us. So our community impact funding now supports informal groups, removing barriers and enabling grassroots initiatives to flourish. At Coastline, we don't just value diversity, we celebrate it. Our annual Customer at Heart Awards and Starts at Home Days events bring together customers, staff and partners to honour the contributions of individuals and communities. These celebrations are more than ceremonies. They are affirmations of our shared commitment to inclusion, dignity and respect. We've also seen a rise in young volunteers and expanded our volunteer scheme with over 5,900 hours donated in 2024 alone, generating a social value of £337,000. Last year, for the fourth time, our volunteer scheme was investing in volunteers accredited, and with the addition of a volunteer coordinator, we are looking to grow the scheme. Our commitments for 2025 reflect our ongoing dedication to inclusive engagement, launching customer-led scrutiny reviews on complaints, trends and planned repairs, as expanding volunteer programmes to increase social value and community impact, hosting more catch-up with Coastline events to bring services directly to customers, which was as a result of customer feedback in our Housing for Older Persons schemes, and supporting those most affected by the cost of living crisis through our Sustainability Fund. We're completing large-scale consultations to review kitchen design options, improving digital engagement tools to make participation more accessible. At Coastline, we believe everyone deserves not just a home, but a voice in how that home and the community around it is shaped. And through the Coastline conversation, we're building a future where diversity is embraced, representation is real, and every customer feels empowered to make a difference. That is all from me.
Thank you very much. That was really good. Sorry to hesitate a little bit. I was just checking out the questions in the question box. And please do, can I remind people, if they do have any questions for any of our guest speakers this afternoon, please do post them in the box, because we're going to be going through those shortly. Well, Laura, thanks very much. That really demonstrates not just your commitment, but your actions as well. And it's great to see that. And I know that it's a challenge, you know, both living and working in rural areas, but also dispersed communities. Mushtaq talked about the sort of urban centres, and I'm sure you also experience that in sort of more dispersed communities as well, some of the sort of inequalities and exclusion that people experience, and equal amounts of poverty as well, I'm sure. So we're going to go through the questions. We've got one or two that I think have been already answered, but I just want to go through those anyway. And then there's an opportunity both for the other contributors to sort of post questions or other comments or observations from all the presentations that we've heard this afternoon. So I think one of the first questions, in fact, we had one question from Janet. Oh, Janet, lovely to have you with us contact. And you had a particular question around the disabled facilities grants, which Caroline has partially answered and Neil's added to. So let me just read it out. I'm wondering if there's any mention of DFGs or disabled facilities grants and their provision and their flexibility or not to support people's preferred solutions around bathing and toileting, taking account of faith needs. So again, a particular question. Caroline, do you just want to sort of paraphrase what you responded?
Well, yeah, I mean, in particular, there's a lack of knowledge about this among the community, regardless of tenure, really. And that's one of the things we need to address about getting the information down to people who need to know about it. And that's aside from issues about whether the Disabled Facilities Grant will enable everything that people need. And as someone's mentioned, it's under review at the moment. So I think there's room to think about that and how it can be better applied.
Yeah, and I think from my attendance at last week's consultative event, we also had Paul Smith from Foundations, the national umbrella body for home improvement agencies. And I think, you know, what was really coming through was, and I can echo that, lack of awareness, irrespective for social housing tenants, whether housing associations or council or indeed owner occupiers. And also, again, coming back to Janet's question, the knowledge of where to go for trusted assessing for that as well. And that was something we were really keen to explore, notwithstanding the fact that there are home improvement agencies and organisations like the London Rebuilding Society working very closely, not just on things like disabled facilities grants, but also to address climate change, looking at sort of energy efficiency and fuel poverty matters as well. So that was really important. And as Neil says in his comments in the answer as well, there is a consultation that's just been announced, I think this week, on the allocations formula of the DFGs. But there is a question at the end which sort of sets out if there are any other aspects that people need to consider, the government should be considered as part of that. And again, something around perhaps what Mushtaq would recommend is an equality impact assessment for anything that comes through this. So Mushtaq and Henri in particular, is there anything that you want to add around disabled facilities grants or adaptations that have come through your members' work or your research?
So before Henri comes in, I'd just say there is a disproportionality aspect here. And I think the level of disabled facilities grants and local authority support in Asian households where people want to stay in the area, not move out and stay with family. They're a vital resource for some of those areas, and there wasn't enough money to go around. So I managed BME Housing Association, and quite often we'd be trying to persuade people to move to more suitable accommodation, but they wouldn't do it. And I think there is an issue there. Whether people have got a better way of addressing it or not, you know, there may be some ideas in the audience, but I think it's a big issue and it disproportionately affects BME communities.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo what Mushtaq has said, but also to kind of recognise that within our report, what we identified was that lack of knowledge of services, as well as access to those resources are real issues within particular communities. One of the projects that we run is a culturally specific project for people that are homeless, and the role of that worker is essentially to almost handhold a household and navigate them through not just a homeless ecosystem or the housing ecosystem, but also to support them in whatever kind of issues that family or individual might be experiencing. And so from the evidence that we're getting, is people are struggling to navigate a system they don't even know is there, or some of the resources that they don't even know are there as well. So for me, I think it's a really valid point, really, in terms of access to resources is also based on people's knowledge of those resources, but also their capital and agency to be able to secure good positive outcomes from themselves through those systems.
That's really interesting, and I know Coastline have done some work around homelessness as well. And could I try and blend the two questions there and questions that Henri poses? One is around how to support people both professionally, but also how do you enable people to access information to navigate the system? Now, I know you didn't come to speak about that, but do you have any knowledge around the work that you do around that?
So based on kind of, how rural Cornwall is, we make it a kind of priority to make sure that we know what's going on and where from one end of the county to the other, so that we are able to kind of signpost and offer support to customers and our clients in the homeless service where needed. And we just, keep on top of that and make sure we're referring. We've got a really good team of key workers at our homeless service who link in with the council and other agencies in the area as well.
Yeah, and again, I suspect you also have seasonal issues as well that impacts both in terms of your ability to recruit people, as well as people who come in and flood into the southwest and perhaps Cornwall in particular. I don't know whether I'm stereotyping or whether that's actually something that does happen.
No, you're correct with the gig economy down here and kind of the seasonal work that you get. We do find that there are periods of that are acute that our customers are in need of a kind of more acute support throughout the year. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, we've got a question that's come through from Francesca, and great to hear from you again, which is much more around perhaps the design aspects and the and what are the challenges around building new homes or adapting housing with a shortage of social housing supply, especially in the context of Black and Asian communities. Could I kick off with you, Mushtaq? Are there any particular things around the design aspects?
So I just think it's really hard to do without having a proper evidence base. And I think that's what we lack. I think housing strategy teams have been decimated over the last 15 years or so. They haven't had the resources to do proper in-depth studies of the needs of their population. For example, when I used to work at AXA Homes, we did some research on the needs of the Asian community, thinking that traditional family structures would be breaking down and people would be less enamored to living in multi-generational households. But the research found exactly the opposite. But that was about 12 years ago. I'd be really interested to see how situation has moved on. So I just think we lack some research in this area. I know Kirklees did something about 2 or 3 years ago. I think you might have been involved in that.
I think Sally's just posted the report up in the chat box.
Yeah, so I think that's the only one that I'm aware of. And it's really hard to answer those questions without having a proper evidence base. And of course, each local authority area, each combined authority area is different.
Well, perhaps we should be encouraging Lord Best to do a specific HAPPI report on the BME community and thinking about that, sort of extending the current 10 principles around that. Henri, do you have any thoughts, or Caroline, on this, about new homes and adaptations?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things around new homes from a community-led house perspective, from a BME perspective, is the issue in terms of accessibility to new homes, and is a primary issue. We've talked about the role of housing associations working with community organisations in order to facilitate and enable new homes. And part of the community-led housing model is around design of new homes and engaging communities in the design of those homes so they meet and is tailored and designed to their particular needs. But I think another crucial point to recognise when we're talking about the availability of housing as well and design is that there are empty homes. This government is driven by an agenda about building new homes, but I think the capacity to redesign, repurpose existing vacant surplus properties, an area that requires a bit more to be looked at as well. And then clearly this issue of design comes into those, because then we're talking about kind of environmental efficiency. We're talking about fit for purpose homes for an aging population.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Caroline, there were some specific things that you touched on in your presentation, which looked at the importance of water in relation to ablutions and other aspects of design. Do you just want to expand on that, about both in terms of adaptations and new build?
Well, yeah, I agree with Henri on that. And I think that one of the issues is this size question. A lot of the times you could do the adaptations if you've got something to adapt into, either by extending the house or by, being able to use rooms differently. But on the question of building at volume and the government's press to just build lots and lots of new houses, that's going to build smaller ones, isn't it? They're not going to build bigger ones when you can have 3 smaller ones on the same site. So I think that the need for the communities to have multi-generational suitable houses for people to age in, at the moment, it's not going to get any better with the new housing. So one of the things we do need to do is look at adapting what we have in the present housing stock. Things like knock-throughs and allowing extensions where it's possible, things like that.
Yeah. And again, it's partly why the LIN is very much part of the Home Coalition's work that HAPPI take an Ageing Better lead on sort of pushing for Part M42 and indeed M43, where appropriate, for much more accessible homes to future-proof for future adaptations as well. So while we have a pressing problem for social housing in its supply, we also have a pressing problem for accessible and adaptable social housing as well. And yes, I think the density issues that you raised, Caroline, could sort of lead us to problems downstream. Robin, glad you were able to sort out your slides and your viewing earlier. I see that you had some problems, but you touched on issues around climate change and something I referred to. Yeah, no, so really interesting, both in terms of climate change impacting on cold homes, but also bearing in mind the last sort of 6 or 7 weeks about sort of, warm homes as well, and so dealing with climate change for not just sort of excess winter deaths, but summer deaths. So does anybody have any thoughts? Let's start off with Laura, because Cornwall's on the Gulf Stream. Do you have any things that you're looking at in relation to climate change as an organisation?
So we recently had a role created called the Sustainability and Carbon Analyst, and they are under the head of sustainability and innovation. And I know that they are working to collate and improve and build upon the data that we currently hold and then look to the future. We've also got two, or one's just finished and one's just starting solar PV projects as well. So that's all happening, and we're working with customers on the consultation side of things as well for the delivery of that, and then within anything that is going to benefit customers in the long term as well.
Yeah, so the benefit is not just in terms of their health and well-being, it's also in terms of the economic, isn't it, and their financial gain.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, go on.
No, sorry, I was just going to say we've seen that in the previous project already, and then with a more recent project on our extra care scheme, where the residents will see the benefits of the solar panels that have been installed there.
That's pretty well. We look forward to following that, and perhaps I can see a future Housing LIN case study on that scheme coming up as well. So,
yeah,
well, look, thanks very much. And I'm going to sort of, we've got a couple of more minutes. I'm just going to sort of ask Mushtaq, Henri, and Caroline whether they have any thoughts around the climate emergency. Any thoughts on that? Is that something you've been looking at?
Well, just the sense that in particular, it's going to be older people in poor housing who are going to really feel the effects of especially heat. And we saw what happened in Paris a few years ago, didn't we, in that terrible heat epidemic. So I think we do need to take this seriously, especially for older people in poor housing.
Yeah, and then how that all links into, damp and mold and cavity wall insulations, and, do we ventilate our homes? Do we heat them well? All those sort of things. Somebody who probably is in a situation where he's got air conditioning at the moment. Henri, what's it like over in Dominica?
Yeah, I'm sweating buckets at the moment. Yeah, I think the angle or perspective I'll come from is looking at retrofitting homes and looking at it from a perspective of making sure that they're energy efficient, that they're homes that have good insulation but are cool. Good insulation is built into them, and in consideration of the kind of the interconnection between public health and housing, and clearly recognizing that is important. And one of the stark things that we found is that public health has a responsibility for housing as a statute body, but we don't generally hear a lot coming out from public health or aligned policies between public health and housing. The other quick point I wanted to mention as well was in terms of kind of climate emergency. There is scope as well, if you look at it from an economic perspective, to look at the green skills agenda as well, and equip people with skills in that green skills agenda. So just wanted to quickly make those 2 points before we sign off.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Mushtaq, the final word from you?
Nothing really to add to what my colleagues have said, but we know that BME communities live in the poorest housing, poorest quality housing, poorest services, and they're more likely to be affected by climate change.
Well, look, on behalf of the Housing LIN, can I thank all four of you for your fantastic presentations. If you are looking and following the chat, lots of thumbs up and congratulations to you. Really interesting, thought-provoking sessions. This, as I said at the outset, is our final happy hour of our current series. We're going to be having a summer break. But do come back to us towards the end of September when we kick off our autumn series. I know Sally and I are already starting to plan and shape that between the end of September and mid-December. It will be here very soon, so please do join us. But on behalf of the Housing LIN team, can I thank you all for joining us? Can I thank our delegates who've increased in numbers over the series as we've progressed? Sally, can I thank you and the team behind the scenes for helping out so wonderfully? And can I all wish you a very happy evening and look forward to seeing you in a couple of months' time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.